Hey guys, it's Rufus. Everything in this guide is not required to be a Plat player. However, if you utilize as many of these tips as you can, you will definitely improve a lot. And no matter where you are, these skills will be useful at every level. First, I'll discuss mechanics. Quick peeking is relatively simple, but it can also win rounds, and here's how. When you quick peek like this, you can get intel and check an area around a corner. This is very useful for getting both intel, but also for pre-firing. In many situations, you will see an enemy, and afterwards, you will be able to easily pre-fire that player. If you were to catch somebody walking down a hallway, they would have nowhere to go, and so pre-firing them would be extremely easy. And so quick peeking is basically very powerful when people are in bad positions, but it will also save your life. Being able to check a corner is a very powerful tool that can be very rage-inducing to your opponents. Quick peeking also goes hand in hand with pre-firing, because you should pre-fire a lot if you expect to be peeked. The more you pre-fire, the higher the statistical chance of that pre-fire hitting. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can win gunfights and win rounds when it does. Another important topic is re-peeking. If you're going to quick peek, you will be peeking twice if you see someone, once for the intel and a second when you shoot. When you re-peek, you do not want to re-peek at the same height. For example, if you peek at head height, you will want to re-peek at crouch level. This makes you less predictable since your enemy will have seen you at head height. Therefore, they will expect you to peek at head height again. Re-peeking is all about unpredictability. You want to try and catch your enemy off guard if you're going to re-peek, as you're already very predictable. Next, I'm going to talk about patience, because sometimes it can pay off to just sit and hold an off angle. An off angle is an angle that isn't expected or very common. That can be by changing height or by just being somewhere random. Anyway, there are many times when the other team can get randomly aggressive, and so if you expect to get peeked, sometimes the right decision is to just wait for the enemy to throw their life away. However, it's also important to realize that if you hold common angles, you will most likely get killed. In Siege, it is swing or be swung, and due to the not so great perspective in this game, when you hold an angle, you oftentimes die to people almost immediately after seeing them, or maybe you don't even see them at all. And so because of this, you want to try and have all your gunfights be in your control. What I mean is that you want to be the one swinging, and this does not mean that you should just swing everything, I'll get to that later, but what it means is that if you expect to get swung, then you should swing on them instead. In short, it'll be easier to win the gunfight if you're the one making it. And the final thing regarding mechanics I'll talk about is aim training. I'm going to suggest that you watch this video as it'll tell you everything you need to know, but I will summarize it here. If you are training your aim for more than 45 minutes per day, you are probably wasting your time. And in addition, you should be changing your sensitivity in practice as it will accelerate your improvement. The best way to train your aim is by practicing in intervals. For example, warm up for 10 minutes and then re-warm up every hour. This will keep your aim sharp and contribute to your improvement. In the video I mentioned, I go far more in depth and I have an article in the description of that video backing up my claims. Link in the description below. But basically, most people are training their aim too much and not focusing on what's really important, decision making. One thing I talk about a lot is the importance of decision making, and in order to be a strong fragger, you need to make the right decisions. This is because aim can only win you so many gunfights. 95% of the time, your decisions are what get you a kill. Putting yourself in strong positions is a skill that cannot be taught with aim training. It has to be acquired by consistent practice. This is why I highly suggest playing a lot of ranked, as you can focus on gun skill alone. At this point, I'm going to give some common mistakes that players make. Poor utility usage is probably the most common. Most people often find themselves with most of their utility at the end of the round. And every round, you should set yourself with the goal of using your utility as quickly as possible. If you're on an entry operator, you should try to use your utility first, since you will most likely die first. As a support, you don't need to worry about it as much, but you should still try to use your utility when you can. The reason using your utility is so important is because if you don't, then this is what happens. You will be pushing into Melusi's Banshees, barbed wire, deployable shields, and other utility. If you don't clear all of this utility before you push, you're much less likely to win your gunfights. And if you're playing operators like Cap Tower Ying, you should be using the utility during the execute and roam clear. but you should also have a goal when selecting these operators. Most people will save their smokes for the execute, but in Capitão's case, where can you use his firebolts? You can use them to clear defenders from any positions. This is especially useful for clearing people behind deployable shields. With Capitão's fire, you can take control and speed up a roam clear. In Ying's case, you have a variety of uses. You can use the candelas during execute and flash anchors on site. On coastline, there are some great uses. If you're clearing a roamer in billiards, you can toss a candela through this drone hole and push that roamer. Or if you go into hookah, you can flash someone holding sunrise from above. At the same time, you'd have players push into sunrise. If you have a goal in mind when selecting your operator, you can really use your utility effectively. The next mistake is where you enter the building, and this will depend on whether you're with a team or by yourself. But if you're in solo queue, you need to enter with your teammates. You should never enter the building alone because you cannot protect your flank whatsoever. And in addition, if you were to take control, you'd have to take a lot of blind gunfights. So if you push with your team, you can not only help them achieve their goal, but your team will help you get a foothold into the building. If you're with a duo or 5-stack, you need to use your numbers in order to create a pinch on any areas. For example, if you're going to clear the top floor of Clubhouse, you could start by opening the jacuzzi wall and setting a player on highway. This allows you to have one person play on the windows and another can push in. If you add in any players, they can drone while also cutting off essential rotations such as main stairs. Or you could have somebody open the logistics hatch and another person could enter from CCTV in order to pinch any roamers. Roam clearing is all about surrounding roamers and preventing them from rotating away. Another mistake is in communication, and that mistake is overcalming. This is extremely common and you've probably experienced it yourself. I found that it's mostly caused by two things. Sometimes people just talk too much, and other times it's caused by the fact that nobody's on the same page. The first point is obvious. If you're talking about things that aren't siege related, then stop. If you're calling something out 3 times, then stop. And also if you're getting loud and speaking over the others, you need to stop. However, when people overcom, it's usually because everybody's just going on the fly and there is no plan established before the round. When there's no plan prior to the round, people have to ask questions and communicate a lot more in order to get throughout the round. This is a common mistake amongst new teams too. When you just get a stack or team together, you guys may have no chemistry and so communication can be sloppy initially. However, overcoming can also be caused by confusion, and confusion is mostly caused by overcomplication. When you overcomplicate an idea or strat before a round, people will usually get confused and won't perform the strat effectively. This causes a lot of miscommunication and overcoming throughout a round. If you're the IGL or if you are just telling a strat to someone, you need to keep things simple. Simplicity is important whenever you're teaching somebody something because you want them to actually retain the information. If you can make your strat simple, you will have a lot more success with your team. Sometimes there are more complicated strategies, but that is something that should be explained and practiced before a game. This last mistake is not utilizing Peeker's advantage. If you hold too many angles in Siege, you will lose majority of those gunfights, and that is just how this game is. And because of that, you need to utilize Peeker's advantage at every opportunity. Remember, as I described earlier, it's swing or be swung in Siege. In Siege, there are going to be a lot of bad habits that you develop early on, and you'll need to correct them as soon as possible. One of the most common involves focusing on irrelevant matters. If you're typing in chat and being toxic or even just being conversational, you're going to perform worse in game. You cannot be focused on other players or on the other team. If you stop focusing on the game, you will stop thinking about how you can adapt, set up, etc. And this can also apply to anything else in Siege that distracts you. If you're not paying attention, how can you expect to perform? Amongst irrelevant things people get worked up about, rank is by far the most common. If you see that the other team has a higher rank than you, don't worry about it because rank does not determine skill whatsoever. It's important to realize that. Right now, you can pretty easily get carried up to Plat 2 and Plat 1 if you play with better players. If you focus on rank or even the outcome of the game itself, you will distract yourself from your ability to focus only on the game itself. Another common thing people focus on is the negative. If you focus on something that happened in the past, such as a bad play or even something such as a missed kill, you will once again distract yourself. Remember, there's only one thing that you need to focus on, and that's the present. You don't need to worry about the ranks, the outcome, or the past. Moving on, over-peaking is also a bad habit that most players have. Usually, people are very aggressive in ranked, and so many people develop that aggressive style of play. I'm not saying being aggressive is bad either, but you need to be aggressive at the right times. If you're aggressive at the wrong times, you will more than likely just throw your life away. There are 4 types of aggression that I explain in this video. This is going to explain when to peak, and I highly suggest that you check it out. At this point, I'll be discussing crosshair placement, and this is not just about aiming head height. While yes, it is true that you should aim head height majority of the time, there are plenty of situations where aiming crouch height is better. If you expect the enemy could very well be crouching, aim crouch height. The thing about aiming crouch height is if the enemy is crouching, then you'll get a headshot. If they're not crouching, then you will just shoot them in the body, so unless they're prone, you can pretty much always hit your shots. However, knowing when to aim crouch height is a skill that can be developed by game sense and intuition mostly. Usually people will crouch or prone when they're sitting still, so you can expect anchors, for example, to hold a lot more angles as they're generally going to hold a position rather than push. And so usually when I expect someone to be sitting still, that is when I'll aim crouch height, because when you're holding an area, you're more likely to crouch or even prone. You can also aim at crouch level if you expect to get peaked at crouch height, because crouch peeking is very common, and so sometimes aiming at crouch height will get you that headshot. It's also very common for other players to switch their head level, as I mentioned earlier. So if you get peaked at head height, a good player would change their level in order to not get pre-fired. Besides the level you aim at though, it's important to practice good mechanics when ADS'd. A lot of people don't aim around objects, but rather they aim into the wall and then peek around a corner. This will get you killed in so many situations. If you get swung by an enemy, your crosshair will not be on them and you'll be forced to flick. In order to practice aiming around objects, I suggest using T-Hunt. I always practice my movement a bit in T-Hunt and warm up my aim by scanning rooms and aiming around things. However, besides mechanics, mentality is by far one of the most important aspects of success, not just in Siege, but in practically everything. If you don't believe in yourself or your team, you're setting yourself up for failure. You cannot aim for failure, or else that is what you'll get. After all, how can you expect yourself to win if you're deeming yourself incapable of doing so anyway? I see a lot of people that give up before a game is even over, and they act like they've lost. As I mentioned earlier, you cannot focus on the outcome. During the game, the present is all that matters. And because of this, you cannot stop trying your best until the game is over. Clutches and comebacks do happen all the time, so you need to guarantee that they happen as often as possible. In addition to this, you need to be able to control your ego. If you blame your teammates for everything and can't take ownership, then you need to take a look at yourself. Even if your teammates do something dumb, you cannot focus on it. Remember, no focusing on irrelevant matters. There is always something more that you could have done during a game. Even if you did amazing, there is always something more. In fact, even if you have a lot of kills, a lot of them might not have mattered whatsoever, because kills only matter if you win the round. If you didn't win the round, then the kills are impactless. So what could you have done better? Well, every time you die, it's your fault, and you need to treat it that way. Even if you get 4 kills in a round and you lose to the last guy, what could you have done better there? Because there's always something that you can take away from your death. If you can really look at everything with what you could have done better, rather than focusing on your teammates, even if it was their fault or even if they did do bad, focusing on yourself only really helps with improvement. And as a competitive player who's been playing comp for over a year now, I can say that when a team has a bad mentality, I will never consider joining that team. And if a player has a bad mentality, I will never pick up that player. And I will make a mental note to never play with that player or to never be on the same team as that player. Nobody likes being around toxic people, and so if you have an ego or you're toxic, people won't want to play with you. Now, in order to become a Plat player, there are some key things you will need to work on improving. Communication is the most important, and that is because communication and teamwork is the only thing that can carry a team in Siege. Even if you don't have strategy or gun skill, teamwork can and will win rounds. Now, when it comes to improving communication, you need to make sure that you do two things. You need to call out the right information, and you need to have discussions between rounds. Now, besides calling out who is where, there are a number of other things you should tell your teammates. What you're actively doing, what you're watching, and what you see all play a part in communication. If your teammates know you're watching a certain doorway, or clearing a certain shield, or actively pushing into a room, they'll be able to paint a mental picture as to what's currently happening in the round. And so this is the difference between what you're watching and what you can see. You can see utility, you can see holes and rotations, you can see people, but what you're watching is completely different, because when you're watching a rotation or a doorway, you could be covering a teammate's flank, and that's very important for them to know. Your teammates will know if somebody is watching their back, and they'll know if a certain wall is being opened. It's important for your teammates to not only understand where the enemies are, but what the team as a whole is doing. Between rounds, you need to be discussing with your team. You need to pick a plan and follow through with it. And you should make any adaptations or make any notes of what the other team did the previous round. For example, if you know the defenders had a roamer in a certain area, you could call for an entry player to switch their entry point. This way, you'd be able to be in a better position to pinch the roamer. Adaptations like these are simple and very impactful when you actually discuss between rounds. Another thing to focus on is droning. One thing that people fail to utilize is effective teamwork when droning in an entry player. Now, when you drone an area, you want to have an entry player close by so that they can react off of your information. If your drone is way too ahead, the entry player will not be able to react and they'll be forced to take blind gunfights. This will not only waste drones, but it will also waste time, as the entry players will oftentimes hesitate and stall, because nobody wants to push a roamer blindly. This is something easy to fix, but it requires patience. Both the entry and the drone need to make sure that they stay close enough together in order to react off of calls. Both players have to be at the same tempo, and nobody can go ahead of the other. You can also catch a lot of people off guard if they shoot your drone and the entry player pushes immediately. If you're aiming at the ground and then have to flick immediately, it can surprise you. Lastly, you should understand consistency. A lot of people want to be consistent, but understand that you'll never be consistent. In order to be consistent, you would have to be the best player in the world. But as long as you go against better players and better teams, you will have bad games. Being inconsistent isn't bad either. If you keep performing poorly, that means you're going against good competition. You should be happy because that's where you learn the most. Every death is a lesson, and the harder you get destroyed, the more lessons you can take from the experience. Siege is a grind, and if you truly want to be good at this game, it requires a lot of effort and consistency. You can't quit, and you can't let yourself get discouraged by some losses or some bad games. Everybody has to go through bad games and slumps, so keep your head up and realize that improvement will come. If you keep grinding and working on your core skills, you will improve, and all it takes is time and dedication. In order to improve though in the long term, I have two recommendations. Besides all of the tips that I've given in this video, all you need to improve are two things. First, you need to play games. Ranked games are great for improving gun skill and just getting experience in the game. If you want to improve your strategy though, watching Pro League is great for that. You get to see the pros make their decisions and you can try to use their ideas in your games. As long as you play a lot of ranked and watch a lot of Pro League, you will notice improvement. Over time, you'll begin to play more and more like a pro as you pick up strong habits one by one. This is how I got to where I am today, and I did a lot of just ranked and a lot of grinding Pro League. Other than that, it's difficult to credit my improvement to anything else. Playing competitive though made me a much better player, as I was forced to go against players and teams that were way better than me. Now if you want to follow my Twitter, Discord server, or Patreon, link will be in the description below. But that's all to say for this video, and if you learned something, give the video a like, and if you want to see more content like this, then subscribe. Toodles!